I'm most touched that Susan would take the time to read my work and converse with me about it. I'm a great admirer of her poetry. I was on the selection committee for the Anahi Literary Award this last year, along with 3 other writers. And we had a lot of great books to read and review. But I think that Susan's in a world of her own as a poet right now in our community. I encourage you to look at her work. It's very powerful, very rich, both with our history and just in the human experience, expressing the human experience. I'm going to read a little bit. Susan asked me yesterday, I think, to read a passage from my 3rd novel, This Angelic Land, and to set her up for her questions for me. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. This book is set during the 1992 Los Angeles riots, which were the largest riots in U.S. history. Some people call it the Rodney King riots. A black man was beaten. The trial occurred. The police who beat him found the police innocent. The jury found the police who beat him innocent. And the next day, a riot began in the city of Los Angeles that tore the city to tore apart the seams. It ended up being, 6,000 buildings were set on fire, costing billions in damages, and disrupted the city to the extent that you could smell smoke in the air for weeks afterwards. It looked like the bombed out shell of a city, many parts of it. With that in mind, I decided the main character should be a refugee of the Beirut Civil War. So he's revisiting the war that he escaped with his parents, and now finds himself in another civil war. He has a cast of friends. They're all Middle Eastern, as it turns out, by intention. One of them is a Kurd who is a fine artist, a painter. The main character, Adam's friend, is a Kurd. Adam, something happens to Adam in the course of the book. Well, he dies. I'll just come out and say it. I can't do it otherwise. Yeah, he dies. But it doesn't happen at the end of the book. The book is structured in kind of a weird way. So what I'll be reading now is the end of the book. His brother, who is a documentary filmmaker, has come back to Los Angeles to figure out what happened to his brother. And he spends an evening with the Kurd, one of Adam's close friends, and they are wrapping up an evening which wraps up the book. There is one character that comes up in this passage called the Wizard. The Wizard is an old Jewish mentor of Adam, the dead brother. So just to give you that setup. He talks in a vernacular that's kind of broken English, the Kurd. So if it sounds weird, it's supposed to sound weird. Okay? All right. So I'm going to pick it up. Very difficult reading from novels because you can't start. You have to just dip in and people have to catch up. They're now in the Kurd's apartment. The Kurd had converted his 1-bedroom apartment into a studio. Paintings and found objects, a dish, a rag, a doll, hung here and there between the paintings. A single bed was in what looked to be the kitchen nook. I have no garage, he explained, so I had to sacrifice the bedroom for storage. I want to show you these, he said, and broke out a short stack of photographs. Photos of buildings transfigured by the fires, of a long brick wall that was left standing while everything else to which it had once been connected had fallen. Pure poetry, he said. He shot them over a period of a single week right after the burning, but they had contained enough information for a lifetime of meditation. The photo seemed to have inspired a painting that stood on a large easel, maybe 7 by 7, fixed against the largest wall. There had been a fire, a great fire that had consumed a landscape, probably a forest, and what remained were a few scorched areas and a single tree and a single bird on that tree, or rather their shadows. In a dreamy, beautiful blue was slowly washing over this firestorm world, like the mind slowly washes over a terrible memory until that memory is all but gone. All in all, it was the portrait of a kind of amnesia, violent and rapturous in its beauty, the very definition of sublime. The Kurd turned on the dining room light, which he converted into a separate workspace, and against one wall hung a portrait of a woman dressed in traditional peasant clothing. Her eyes, like the Kurds, were large, brown, and intense. Her face hardened but handsome. She stood cut off at the waist in front of a bombed-out brick building through which fire poured from a window, with one hand reaching out to the viewer to give her last offering. "It is my mother," he told me. "I painted it after she died. It is also for the Kurdish people." I looked at the painting again and told him, "I can see my own people in it, my own grandmother." Yes, it is a picture of survival, and few people in history know survival like your people do. "What is the big deal?" they say. "It happened 75 years ago, so long ago." But for people 3,000 years old, this is a drop in the bucket of time. Let me tell you, if America should ever feel the thundering drive of an invading army, ever see the heads of their young rolling in front of their eyes, 2/3 of their population gone, not for 2,000 years would they forget. The whole world would be brought to their knees for the killing of 1,000 innocent Americans, I guarantee you. He left for the kitchen and returned with a mason jar in one hand and 3 small glasses stacked in the other. The Kurd said he loved this stuff. "Let's drink some together in memory of the first time we met, me, you, and our brother." He emptied an even amount of the brew into each of the 3 glasses and set one glass to the side. There was only one place to sit, really, and so we sat there, 15 feet or so in front of the painting. He in his painting chair, an old leather lounger, and I in a simple wooden chair next to it. The anise smell rose like the sweetest memory of my brother as I brought the glass to my lips. The Kurd said, "Maybe I just have to get over it, or get on with it, or accept it for the way it is, or be at peace, or love the one you're with, leave it or love it. Maybe it's just me, as the Americans say." "But we are American," I told the Kurd. The Kurd says, "Yes, you are Armenian American, I am Kurdish American, there's an Italian, Swedish, Mexican American." That little hyphen, whatever they call it, that little bridge, sturdy as the Golden Gate, held worlds together. But now look, the hyphen has crumbled, snapped. This country has become one of those Greek Medusas with 1,000 tribes on her head, all biting and poisoning each other. "America," he laughed. "What does this mean anymore?" I said, "It's obvious. We're here. We're in America. So we are Americans." He said, "We are in the place, of course, but the concept has always been separate from the place." "The concept is elastic," I said. "What it means is for us to decide, for each generation to decide for its own, just the way you decide for yourself what each painting will look like." The Kurd lit up a cigarette. He slid one out for me. He took a puff and said, "The summer I came to Chicago, I went to New York City and visited all the places I'd only seen pictures of. I wanted to see it all, but the Statue of Liberty is what I wanted to see most. So I took the ferry out to the little island there. In reality, there's no picture that can do her justice. Her monumentality is beyond the puny human brain. That lantern she holds, an invitation, but also a kind of challenge. She lighted the way here for generations, but now I think she is lighting the way out of here, watching over America's passage away from America. If the concept is elastic, as you say, what fixes it to this wasteland? It has migrated beyond, and it will survive beyond, the same way that Alexander took the Greeks to the beyond. Maybe in a little tent in a Syrian refugee camp, or a studio apartment in Tbilisi, or a hillside village in Bangladesh, you will find Americans. And maybe these Americans will rise up from that hut or tent. Enough of them will rise in a new America, in a place we would never expect will be born. And maybe it can be reborn here, I said. Look at what this country has survived. The Civil War, slavery, suffrage, 2 world wars, McCarthyism, Vietnam. The Kurd replied, maybe it was too much for the humankind, this experiment, and always will be. Maybe the great irony is unfolding before our eyes. The Mongols, the Americans in name, are snuffing any tiny human hope lantern that turns on anywhere in the world, just like they snuffed out our brother. But I am going nowhere. I will stay. When I was a boy, I was in love with America. I could only call it love for this brave knight, his heroic adventure in the face of 10,000 ogres, dragons, and evil sorcerers of history. I admit I am like a little boy who guards the castle, even if that castle is empty. From the peripheries, I could see that he'd been weaving my brother's fate into this damning portrait of America. Are you saying that America died with these riots? That America died when my brother died? The Kurd said, let us not make it into some metaphysics. It would make his death cheap. I agree. But he was a victim. The noisy spinning tops on the way to their oblivion cut him down. Of that I'm sure, 100% sure. There is no other explanation. The Kurd sighed and shook his head. But if there was another explanation, the Kurd said, our brother would find it. He was always finding in the most ridiculous things something to ponder, to wonder about. Someone would say something stupid and I'd want to crush it, put it out of its misery. And he would reach down and try to save it, feed it honey like he was feeding an injured bird. He didn't have it in him to hold grudges, I said, except maybe against himself. Do you know he tried to commit suicide? Yes. I found out about it when I was reading his journal, I said. He never told me. He didn't want his family to know. He was afraid it would cause you too much pain and worry. Now it's causing me a different kind of pain, that he would keep it from me. I'm so sorry, the Kurd said. This is what I was talking about when I said that I was discovering things about us that were hard to deal with. Don't punish yourself, he said. He might have told you in time, but they took his time away. While he was going through it, he didn't tell me while he was going through it. I buried my head in my hands. The Kurd let me cry. For several minutes he let me cry before he said, it is one of many deaths you will go through. You must cry your heart out, each and every one, over each and every one. Even if there are 100, and even if they last your whole life. With each tear you shed, you're watering his memory. You are keeping it alive. I could have loved him better when he was alive. I could have nurtured him better. This is the number one sign of love, that we recognize that we have fallen short and that we wish we could have done better. Do not confuse completion of love for loving. When did he talk to you about it? He called me from the hospital where they jailed him up. I went and visited him there. I remember that I told him this story because I thought it would help. When I lived in Chicago, I made friends with an older man, a painter, one of these social realists, Ashcan School or something. He was wonderful and youthful in his mid-70s when we met. I visited him 2-3 times a month, and we talked about art and poetry and music. I was going through some hard times, and to help, he told me this wonderful story. He said that when he was in his 30s, he was forced to move into a basement, no windows and a low, low ceiling, where he painted with one stupid bulb hanging above his head. No matter how he painted, no matter the luster of his washes, all his paintings turned out sad and gloomy. He thought he'd lost his touch as an artist. And when he finally left that place, he picked through his paintings and decided only a handful was worth keeping. As he brought the others outside for the dumpster, he was stunned. The darkness of his basement had led him to overcompensate for color. And now, in the fullness of the sun, the paintings were vibrant, trembling with color. He thought he'd lost the touch, but the absence of good light had led him to some of his most amazing work. That's a beautiful story, I told him. I loved that man. He was to me what the wizard was to your brother, a substitute grandfather for me. Since I left Kurdistan, I've always been looking for substitutes, a family. Your brother was a substitute brother for me too. I hope I told the Kurd that makes us brothers as well. I told him that though I could not agree with all he said, I respected his honest reckoning of the world. That honesty, I told him, is probably what my brother loved about you. And what I loved about him, the Kurd said. I asked, what keeps you working? What keeps you painting? There was one time, he said, when I wanted it all. But now my paintings have become a ritual, something I do, just do, like the cavemen went into the caves and did what they did. But who are you painting for? You, he said, people like you and your brother, those who carry the torch into the cave. I asked him this because I felt in the middle of that darkness something spark inside of me, a strong conviction that I should complete my project about Lebanon and then immediately start another one. I want to write a book about what happened here, what happened to my brother. I just can't let him go, not without saying or doing something. Maybe it is only in the artist's mind, the Kurd said, that we write it or paint it, we have stopped it from falling into oblivion, that we have snatched it from the mouths of the Mongol horde. And you are the perfect person, he told me, to write that book too. Only someone with half a foot in this country and half a foot out can write a book that tells it the way it happened here. Once you are in with both feet, it is already too late. They have already swallowed you up. With that said, he tracked toward the painting in front of him. I cannot stop thinking of the problem hidden in this painting, he said. Each canvas has its own personality. Sometimes it's like the wise fool that is ridiculing you. Other times it takes a hold of you like a world-class whore. This canvas, sometimes it is doing both. The Kurd used a big table to store his paints, 100 different colors that he prepared in the old-fashioned way from pigments and linseed oil. He enjoyed painting with acrylic, he said, but the process of painting with oil, like he imagined the process of writing in longhand, slowed the act down and created depth in the painting that was impossible to get otherwise. Something of a purely material nature
happened on the canvas, he said, that had nothing to do with the intent of the artist, an alchemical thing. The Kurd rose from his lounger and stepped up to his painting table and lifted in one hand his palette and in the other a brush. He backed up and studied his work in progress. I was studying it too, and particularly the unearthly and beautiful blue that was slowly eating away at everything. Only a few apertures onto the fire remained, and through them you could see the shadows of the bird and the tree. The Kurd said, "There's a brutal truth and beauty in the ruins." No, their broken bodies reveal something fundamental. It was a point of view, of course, that I've been making my own for years, from Lebanon, or even before I was born, to Armenia, to New York, to Los Angeles, and now the body of my brother. I've been following a virtual trail of ruins for the better part of my life. He came up to the painting, dabbed his brush on the palette, and made a few strokes on the canvas, and then dabbed again and made a few more strokes. Finally, he stepped back for me to see. "That," he said, "is for you and Adam." On the left and halfway up, he painted a horizontal band of sunlight, still wet. The oil was golden and glistening, but whether the light it provided was coming or going was impossible to say, whether it was breaking on the horizon or draining away from beneath the door.
Thank you for reading that, Aris.
Thank you for having me read that. That's not an easy read.
Yes. Now you all have to go back and read the beginning and the middle until you get to the end there, which you just heard. So I wanted you to read that passage because, as I was saying to you, I think This Angelic Land, which is your third novel, forms a sort of bridge between the first two novels, which are Bloodvine and River Big. And for those of you who haven't read these yet, I highly recommend. They are absolutely gripping, heart-wrenching stories of this Armenian family in the 1950s in the Central Valley in California, and the story of two brothers who are torn apart by a disagreement over a plot of land. And Bloodvine was Aris's first novel. River Big is the sequel, but you can also read it separately. Each one is just outstanding. So This Angelic Land then moves us from these two books, which focus on first generation Armenians coming to America, first and second generation Armenians, those who have escaped the genocide, survived, made their way to California, and had children. So the main protagonists in Bloodvine and River Big are Andy Demerjian and his brother Abe, who are both born in the U.S. They are half-brothers, and therein may lie the seed of their discontent, but perhaps not. There are many reasons for it. So with these novels that focus on the first and second generation from 1915 mainly through the 50s and 60s, we then move to This Angelic Land, which is, fast forward 30 years or so, set in 1992. But interestingly written. I wanted to ask you, I guess first of all, a good place to start would be asking when you started writing it, because it was published in 2012.
Yes.
And whether you were in LA at the time of the riots, living there.
Yep.
And so maybe that would be a good place
Well,
to start.
1992, I was living in LA, as you said, I was 32 32. And I had just finished graduate school and was having the time of my life in the mid-Wilshire area. You don't know, those you don't know, Los Angeles. It's now kind of a hip area, but at that time a lot of Jewish ladies, with their, Jewish delis, and there was an LA County Museum of Art. And I was living there when the riots started, and I'd written 3 novels before my first published novel, and I was working on a third novel when the riots hit, and I dropped that and I began to just write my observations. But it was so complicated with the feelings I had watching the city go up in flames that essentially I put the story aside for 18 years, just put it away. And then the anniversary of riots were coming up, and I thought, this would be a good time to try to write that book. But I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to approach it until I was talking with Arno, actually, of Arbriel Bookstore. He's the owner of the great Arbriel Bookstore in Glendale. And he said, well, why don't you make your main character Lebanese? And then I thought, once he said that, I was moving. Because, there's so many parallels. Lebanon, LA, his parents were in Armenia, now he's in LA. He's a bridge between the two, the old world and the new. So that really set me going, and I began writing the book in earnest in 2009 or something like that, 2008, 2009.
And there's so many, I was just jotting down some notes when you were reading, there are so many elements to that passage that encapsulate your writing as a whole, specifically this angelic land, the themes of this angelic land, but also the books from Bloodvine all the way through the most recent one I've read, which is the last one that was published Waiting for Lipschitz. The making of art as ritual, storytelling. In so many of your books you have stories nested within stories within stories. You have people who, it's almost as if by passing on the story, it's like a breaking of bread, right? There's this, and I think of Menger, meaning friend, means someone that you sit and eat with, but also storytelling. So there's this sense of nourishment between people. The dialogue between the Kurt and Eric, this is your dialogues throughout. There's so much action, but the dialogue moves these novels, is an engine driving these novels as well. And I need my glasses to see what I wrote here. Ruins, of course. Substitutes for family throughout these novels. You have these mentors, gurus, the Kurd and the wizard in this angelic land. In Waiting for Lipschitz, there's not Lipschitz, as you might think. If you haven't read the book, he's kind of the anti-guru, I would say. But Hirschman, who is the novelist that the screenwriter looks up to and reveres. And then this hyphenated identity, and I love your description of the hyphen connecting Armenian American, Italian American as the bridge, and has this bridge crumbled, leaving two sides that can't speak to each other. So we could take it in any of those directions, our conversation. Maybe one question I have is a shift that I see from these earlier books to the later books is that Andy, the main character of Bloodvine and Riverbig, doesn't have a guru. He doesn't have a mentor. He has his father died when he was young, and he is really isolated, and that is part of his struggle.